The enemy of my enemy. Xayah had always known her fate. As a warrior of the Kereth Legion, she was born into a world of conquest. Her people, the Kereth, were fierce and unyielding, sweeping across galaxies, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. The mission was simple: dominate or destroy. For Xayah, loyalty to her people was not a choice, it was ingrained in her very existence. She thrived on the thrill of battle, on the chaos of war, and on the cries of her enemies. But now, she sat in a cold, metallic cell aboard a human starship. The shackles around her wrists hummed faintly, draining her strength with every passing moment. The cell was eerily quiet, save for the low vibration of the ship's engines. Xayah had never known silence like this. It was oppressive, suffocating. She had been captured, and for the first time in her life, she felt powerless. Her captors were human. Fragile creatures, she had always thought. Their short lifespans and physical weaknesses made them inferior in the eyes of the Kereth. Yet these same, fragile, beings had outmaneuvered her fleet, taking her prisoner with precision and efficiency that left her reeling. Now, she waited for what she assumed would be a swift execution. It was, after all, the Kereth way. The door to her cell hissed open. Xayah straightened, her piercing violet eyes narrowing at the figure that stepped inside. He was human, tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp and unadorned. He didn't wear the heavy battle armor of a soldier, yet his presence was commanding. His eyes, a startling shade of green, met hers without hesitation. There was no fear in them, only a quiet intensity that unsettled her. "I'm Captain Rhys Calder," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And you are Xayah of the Kereth, if I'm not mistaken." Xayah didn't respond. She refused to give him the satisfaction. Instead, she studied him, looking for signs of weakness, any hint of vulnerability she could exploit. But Rhys stood steady, his gaze unwavering. "You're not what I expected," he continued, taking a step closer. "And what did you expect?" Xayah snapped, her voice sharp and defiant. "Someone more, boastful," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Most Kereth warriors we've encountered can't stop proclaiming their superiority. Yet here you are, silent. Observing." Xayah's jaw tightened. She hated how easily he had read her. "Do what you came to do, human," she spat. "I will not beg." Rhys tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. "Begging isn't in your nature, I suppose. But I'm not here to kill you." That caught her off guard. Xayah's eyes narrowed further. "Then why am I here?" "Because I believe there's more to you than what you've been taught," Rhys said simply. "Your people have ravaged colonies, destroyed entire civilizations. But when I look at you, I don't just see a soldier. I see someone who questions. Someone who thinks." Xayah scoffed, though his words hit closer to home than she cared to admit. "I am Kereth. We do not question. We act." "And yet, here you are," Rhys countered, his voice steady. "Alone in a cell, facing an uncertain future. Tell me, Xayah, do you truly believe in the cause you fight for? Or is it just the only cause you've ever known?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Xayah clenched her fists, her sharp nails digging into her palms. The Kereth cause was her life. Her loyalty to the Legion was unshakable, wasn't it? Rhys studied her in silence, then turned to leave. "Think about it," he said as the door slid shut behind him. For the first time in her life, Xayah was left with something she had never encountered before: doubt. A choice in chains. The silence of the cell was maddening. Xayah paced the small space like a caged predator, her mind spinning. Captain Rhys Calder's words replayed endlessly in her head, and for the first time, she couldn't simply push them aside. "Do you truly believe in the cause you fight for?" It was a question she never thought she'd have to answer. Belief was irrelevant. The Kereth were warriors, bound by honor and tradition. She had been trained since childhood to obey without question, to carry out her orders without hesitation. Yet here, on this human ship, everything felt wrong. The door hissed open again. This time, Rhys entered with a small tray in his hands. A simple meal. Zaya glared at him, her defiance sharp as a blade. "I didn't ask for this," she snapped, refusing to look at the tray. Rhys placed it on a narrow table bolted to the wall, ignoring her hostility. "I figured as much," he replied calmly. "But you need to eat. Starving yourself won't prove anything." Zaya crossed her arms, her gaze like ice. "What do you want, human? To lecture me? To break me?" Rhys leaned against the wall, his posture relaxed but his eyes focused. "I want to understand you," he said simply. "And maybe help you understand yourself." "Understand myself?" Zaya laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the small cell. "You presume much. I am Kareth. I know exactly who I am." "Do you?" Rhys asked, his tone cutting through her bravado. "Because from where I stand, you're a prisoner to more than these walls." Zaya's breath hitched, but she quickly masked her reaction with a glare. "I fight for my people. For their survival. Can you say the same?" Rhys didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice softening. "I fight for survival, yes. But not at the expense of others. That's the difference, Zaya. You fight to conquer. We fight to protect." "Protect?" Zaya sneered. "You humans are weak. You cling to ideals that have no place in the galaxy. Strength is the only thing that matters." Rhys shook his head, a small, almost sad smile on his face. "Strength isn't about destroying everything in your path. It's about knowing when to fight, and when to build something better." Zaya turned away, her shoulders tense. She didn't want to listen, but his words clawed at the walls she had built around her beliefs. Rhys continued, his tone steady but unyielding. "You think your loyalty makes you strong, but loyalty without choice is just another kind of chain. You've been told what to fight for your whole life, but have you ever stopped to ask yourself why?" She whirled around, her violet eyes blazing. "Why should I question it? The Kareth are victorious because we are united. We don't falter like your kind. Is that unity?" Rhys asked, his voice calm. "Or fear of disobedience?" The word struck like a blow. Zaya's lips parted, but no retort came. She had never questioned the orders she was given, the missions she carried out. To do so was unthinkable. Yet now, standing in this cold cell, she realized that she didn't have an answer. Rhys stepped back, sensing her turmoil but not pressing further. "I'm not asking you to betray your people, Zaya. I'm asking you to consider what loyalty means, what it should mean. It's not blind obedience. It's choosing to stand for something because you believe in it." He turned to leave, but paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. "Think about it. You've got more strength than you know. Use it for something that matters." The door slid shut, and Zaya was left alone once more. She sat heavily on the small cot, staring at the untouched tray of food. Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, the foundations of her belief system cracking under the weight of Rhys's words. For the first time, she allowed herself to ask the question she had buried for so long. What if he's right? The thought terrified her, but it also sparked something she hadn't felt before, curiosity. The Kareth had taught her to see the galaxy in absolutes, loyalty or betrayal, strength or weakness, victory or death. But now, she wondered if there was something more. As she sat in the quiet of her cell, Zaya couldn't help but feel the tiniest ember of hope flicker to life. It was fragile, barely there, but it was enough to keep her awake long into the night. Cracks in the armor. Zaya woke to the faint hum of the ship's engines, her muscles aching from another restless night on the cold cot. The edges of her mind were frayed, torn between the certainty she had always known and the questions that now refused to let her rest. She hated how the human captain had gotten under her skin. Rhys Calder, calm, composed, maddeningly patient, had planted seeds of doubt in her heart, and no matter how hard she tried to suppress them, they were beginning to grow. The door hissed open, and Zaya instinctively stiffened. It wasn't Rhys this time. A young human soldier, barely older than a recruit by her estimation, stepped in with a cautious expression. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid. He held a small device in his hands, which glowed faintly with unfamiliar symbols. "The captain sent me to bring you to the observation deck," he said, his voice strained but steady. Zaya raised an eyebrow, masking her curiosity with a cold glare. "Another lecture?" The soldier shifted nervously. "I wouldn't know. I'm just following orders." "Blind obedience," Zaya muttered under her breath, rising slowly. The chains around her wrists buzzed faintly as she moved, a constant reminder of her captivity. The soldier didn't respond, simply gesturing for her to follow. As they walked through the ship's narrow corridors, Zaya couldn't help but notice the humans they passed. Engineers, technicians, soldiers, all working with a quiet determination. There was no fear in their eyes, no hesitation in their movements. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and barking orders she had grown up with in the Kareth fleet. These humans were different, but she couldn't yet put her finger on why. When they arrived at the observation deck, Rhys was waiting for her. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the vast expanse of stars beyond the reinforced glass. The galaxies stretched endlessly before them, a tapestry of light and shadow. "You came," he said without turning, his voice low and even. "I didn't have much of a choice," Zaya replied, her tone sharp. Rhys turned to face her, a faint smile on his lips. "There's always a choice, Zaya. Even when it feels like there isn't." She crossed her arms, meeting his gaze with a defiant glare. "Spare me your philosophy. If you have something to say, say it." He nodded, gesturing for her to step closer. Reluctantly, Zaya approached, her eyes narrowing as she noticed a holographic display projected onto the glass. It showed a planet, a lush, green world teeming with life. Human colonies dotted its surface, surrounded by dense forests and shimmering oceans. "This is Juna 4, Rhys began. One of our oldest colonies. It's peaceful, home to farmers, scientists, and families. No military presence, no weapons, just people trying to live their lives." Zaya frowned. "And why are you showing me this?" Rhys's expression darkened, and he tapped a command into the console. The image shifted to show a Kareth warship hovering ominously above the planet's surface. Zaya's stomach twisted as she recognized the ship's markings. It was one of theirs, a vessel she had trained on as a recruit. "This ship arrived 3 days ago," Rhys said. "Your people have demanded the colony surrender. If we don't comply, they'll burn it to the ground." Zaya's fists clenched. She had heard of such tactics before, but seeing it from the other side was jarring. She had always viewed the Kareth's campaigns as necessary, their destruction justified by the need to assert dominance. But now, standing on this human ship, looking at the faces of people who had never asked for war, it felt different. "You expect me to feel sympathy?" she asked, though her voice lacked the venom she intended. Rhys shook his head. "I expect you to understand what's at stake. These are people, Zaya. Families. Children. They aren't warriors. They aren't a threat. But to your commanders, they're just another target." Zaya turned away, staring out at the stars. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflict. The Kareth had always framed their conquests as victories over weak and deserving prey. But here, faced with the reality of their actions, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally, her voice quieter than before. I want you to see the truth, Rhys said. The Kereth don't fight for survival or honor. They fight to dominate, to control. But you, he stepped closer, his green eyes locking onto hers. You're more than a soldier. I see it in the way you question, in the way you hesitate. You don't have to follow their orders. You can choose to be something more. Xayah scoffed, though it lacked conviction. And what? Fight for you instead. Become your weapon. No, Rhys said firmly. I'm not asking you to be a weapon. I'm asking you to decide what kind of person you want to be. Do you want to be a tool for destruction? Or do you want to stand for something that matters? The words hit her like a blow, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Her entire life had been defined by her loyalty to the Kereth, her unwavering commitment to their cause. But now, for the first time, she wondered if that loyalty was truly hers, or if it had been forced upon her. Rhys turned back to the hologram, his voice softer now. We'll defend Juna with or without your help. But I think you could be more than just a prisoner here. I think you could make a difference. Xayah stared at him, her mind racing. Could she? The thought terrified her. But it also stirred something deep within, a flicker of possibility, fragile but undeniable. I'll think about it, she said finally, the words feeling strange on her tongue. That's all I ask, Rhys replied, his voice steady. As Xayah returned to her cell, her thoughts were a storm of doubt and curiosity. The walls she had built around her beliefs were beginning to crack, and she wasn't sure she could stop them from crumbling entirely. A test of allegiance. Xayah sat on the edge of her cot, her head in her hands, the low hum of the ship's engines vibrating through her bones. The silence of her cell no longer felt like solitude, it felt like a battleground. Every word Rhys had spoken, every image he had shown her, played in a relentless loop in her mind. For years, she had told herself that loyalty to the Kereth was strength, that questioning her orders was weakness. But now, those convictions felt hollow. The door to her cell slid open, and this time, Rhys wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, her dark hair pulled into a tight braid. She wore a uniform similar to Rhys's, but her insignia marked her as a high-ranking officer. Xayah could feel the woman's gaze dissecting her, measuring her worth. This is Commander Thera, Rhys said, his voice calm but edged with seriousness. She leads our ground forces. Thera's expression was unreadable as she studied Xayah. Is this the Kereth warrior you've been vouching for? She asked Rhys, her tone skeptical. She's more than a warrior, Rhys replied firmly. She has potential. Thera raised an eyebrow. Potential doesn't win battles. Xayah bristled but stayed silent, her pride warring with the flicker of doubt in her chest. She had no love for the humans, but she wasn't about to let this woman dismiss her so easily. Why am I here? Xayah demanded, her voice sharp. Rhys met her gaze. Because we need to know where you stand. You've been given time to think, to question. But now, it's time to act. Thera stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking onto Xayah's. We intercepted a message from the Kereth fleet. They're planning to strike Juna within the next 24 hours. Our intelligence suggests they'll use a tactic your people are infamous for, a precision bombing run to disable the colony's defenses before landing ground troops. Xayah's chest tightened. She knew the tactic well. It was efficient, ruthless, and devastating. And what does this have to do with me? She asked, though she already suspected the answer. Thera's expression hardened. We need to know how to stop them. We need your insight, your expertise. Xayah laughed bitterly. You want me to betray my people? You must think me a fool. Rhys stepped between them, his voice steady but unyielding. We're not asking you to betray anyone, Xayah. We're asking you to save lives. Innocent lives. You've seen what's at stake. You've seen the faces of the people your commanders consider expendable. Zaya's fists clenched. She wanted to shout, to argue, to push them away. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the truth in his words. The images of Juna Iv's green fields and bustling communities haunted her. They weren't soldiers. They weren't a threat. They were just people trying to live. Thera crossed her arms. You have a choice, Kareth. You can help us protect these people, or you can stay here and watch as your fleet carries out another massacre. The words stung, but they also ignited something in Zaya, a spark of defiance, not against the humans, but against the role she had been forced to play for so long. For years, she had been a tool of destruction, a weapon wielded without question. But now, for the first time, she saw an opportunity to be something more. Zaya stood, her violet eyes blazing as she met Thera's gaze. If I help you, it's not for your cause, she said firmly. It's because I'm tired of fighting wars that leave nothing but ashes. Thera studied her for a long moment before nodding. Fair enough. But know this, we're putting our trust in you. Don't make us regret it. Rhys's expression softened, a hint of approval in his eyes. You won't, he said quietly, as if speaking directly to Zaya. The next few hours passed in a blur. Zaya was brought to the ship's war room, where holographic maps of Juna 4 and the Kareth fleet filled the air. She worked alongside the humans, her sharp mind and intimate knowledge of Kareth tactics proving invaluable. It felt strange, cooperating with people she had once viewed as prey. But as the hours ticked by, she found herself respecting their determination, their resourcefulness. When the final plan was set, Rhys approached her, his expression serious. You'll be leading a ground team to intercept the Kareth strike force. We need someone who understands their movements, their strategies. Zaya's heart pounded. And what makes you think I won't turn on you the moment I'm free? Rhys smiled faintly. Because you've already made your choice. You're not fighting for us, you're fighting for what's right. Zaya hated how easily he saw through her, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. She had chosen to act, not out of loyalty to the humans, but out of a desire to reclaim something she had lost, her sense of self. As the team prepared for the mission, Zaya donned the human combat armor they had provided. It felt lighter, more flexible than the Kareth gear she was used to, yet just as effective. The weapon in her hands was sleek and precise, designed for efficiency rather than brute force. For the first time in her life, she felt like more than just a soldier. She felt like a warrior with a purpose. As the ship descended toward Juna 4, Zaya looked out at the planet below. The green fields and shimmering oceans seemed impossibly fragile, yet they held a resilience that mirrored the humans who fought to protect them. Rhys's voice crackled over the comms. We're counting on you, Zaya. Whatever happens, know that you've already made a difference. Zaya took a deep breath, her grip tightening on her weapon. The chains that had bound her for so long were gone, replaced by something stronger, hope. She wasn't fighting for the Kareth, nor for the humans. She was fighting for herself, for the chance to be something more. The landing craft touched down, the doors hissing open to reveal the chaos of the battlefield. Zaya stepped out into the fray, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The test of her allegiance had begun, and she was ready to face it head-on. The battlefield within. The ground beneath Zaya's feet trembled with the impact of distant explosions. Smoke and ash swirled in the air, carrying with them the sharp scent of burning metal and scorched earth. The humans around her moved with a sense of purpose, their voices calm yet urgent over the comms as they coordinated defenses. This was not chaos, it was resolve. It was nothing like the frenzied, brutal battles she had fought with the Kareth. Zaya gripped her weapon tightly, the human-crafted blaster humming in her hands. It was light but lethal, a perfect balance of finesse and power. The armor she wore felt unfamiliar, lacking the intimidating bulk of her Kareth combat gear, yet it moved with her like a second skin. For the first time, she felt agile, free. And yet, As she advanced with her team across the rugged terrain of Juna 4, a storm raged within her. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for herself. She was no longer Kareth, but she wasn't human either. What was she fighting for? Could she truly trust the humans at her back? And most haunting of all, could she ever forgive herself for the lives she had taken in the name of the Kareth cause? A sharp whistle overhead snapped her focus to the present. Xayah dove for cover as a barrage of Kareth missiles tore into the ground nearby, sending debris and fire into the air. She rolled behind a boulder, her heart pounding as she peeked over the edge. The Kareth ground troops had landed, their black armor gleaming even in the dim light of the burning horizon. They moved in precise formations, their weapons trained and deadly. "Xayah, report." Risa's voice crackled over the calm but commanding. "I see them," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "They're deploying scouts to flank us. If we don't cut them off, they'll breach the colony's perimeter in minutes." "Understood," Rhys said. "Take your team and intercept. We'll hold the main line." Xayah hesitated for a fraction of a second. These were her people. She knew their tactics, their strengths, their weaknesses. But they wouldn't see her as one of their own anymore. She was a traitor now, a target. And that knowledge burned deeper than she had expected. "Xayah," Risa's voice came again, this time softer. "You've got this." Taking a deep breath, she signaled to the soldiers with her. "Follow me," she said, her tone firm. "Stay low, stay fast." They moved as one, weaving through the jagged rocks and charred foliage. The closer they got to the Kareth forces, the louder the roar of battle became. Xayah's sharp eyes picked out the scout team, 5 warriors moving with lethal precision toward a gap in the human defenses. "They'll be using synchronized comms," Xayah whispered to her team, her mind working quickly. "Disrupt their communication, and they'll lose cohesion. I'll take point. Cover me." One of the soldiers, a wiry man named Lorne, gave her a skeptical glance. "You sure about this?" Xayah met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "I know how they think. Trust me." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right. We've got your back." Xayah moved swiftly, her body low to the ground as she closed the distance between herself and the Kareth scouts. Her heart pounded, but her movements were steady, precise. She had been trained for this, for infiltration, for striking hard and fast. But this time, it wasn't for conquest. It was for protection. The thought filled her with a strange, unfamiliar sense of purpose. The first scout never saw her coming. Xayah's blade flashed in the dim light, and the Kareth warrior crumpled silently to the ground. She moved to the next, her blaster humming as it fired a precise shot that dropped the target instantly. The remaining scouts turned, their movements sharp and coordinated despite the disruption to their comms. Xayah braced herself as one of them charged her, their blades slicing through the air with deadly intent. She parried the strike, her movements fluid and controlled. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she saw the flicker of recognition in the warrior's gaze. "Xayah," he gasped, his voice tinged with shock and anger. "What are you?" Her blade struck before he could finish, and he fell with a look of betrayal that carved itself into her memory. She forced herself to keep moving, to suppress the guilt that threatened to overwhelm her. There was no time for hesitation, no time for doubt. Within minutes, the scouts were neutralized, and the gap in the defenses was secured. Xayah stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving as she surveyed the battlefield. The human soldiers around her murmured words of relief and gratitude, but she barely heard them. Her mind was elsewhere, grappling with the weight of what she had just done. Her calm crackled. "Xayah, report," Rhys said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "The scouts are down," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "The perimeter is secure, for now." "Good work," Rhys said. We're holding the main line, but reinforcements are inbound. We'll need every advantage we can get. Xayah nodded to herself, her resolve hardening. She couldn't afford to falter. Not now. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. As the team regrouped and prepared for the next wave, Xayah found herself looking toward the horizon. The fires of the battlefield painted the sky in shades of red and orange, a stark reminder of the destruction that had defined her life for so long. But here, amidst the chaos, she felt something she had never known before, a glimmer of hope. For the first time, Xayah wasn't fighting to conquer. She was fighting to protect. And that made all the difference. Confronting the past. The battlefield was eerily quiet for a moment, the calm before the storm. Xayah stood with her team, her breath steady but her thoughts a storm of conflict. In the distance, the silhouettes of Kareth reinforcements loomed, their black armor reflecting the flickering flames of the ruined landscape. These were not scouts. These were elite warriors, the kind she had trained with, fought alongside, and once called her own. "Position yourselves," Xayah commanded, her voice firm despite the knot in her stomach. The human soldiers around her moved with precision, their trust in her growing after her successful interception of the scout team. But Xayah knew this next confrontation would be different. The Kareth elites wouldn't fall so easily. They knew how to adapt, how to anticipate, and most terrifyingly, how to exploit weakness. Risa's voice came over the comms. "Xayah, we're counting on you to hold the line. If they breach, the colony won't survive." "I understand," she replied, gripping her weapon tightly. But as she stared at the advancing figures, her confidence wavered. She knew their tactics, their movements, their discipline, because it was hers. She had taught some of them these very strategies. One of the human soldiers, a young woman named Sarah, glanced at Xayah. "You okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Xayah nodded, though her thoughts were far from steady. "Stay focused. This won't be easy." The first wave hit hard and fast. Kareth elites moved like shadows, their precision and ferocity unmatched. Xayah fired her blaster, her shots finding their marks with deadly accuracy. Around her, the human soldiers fought bravely, holding their ground against the relentless assault. But then, amidst the chaos, she saw him. Commander Vryn. His towering frame and silver-trimmed armor were unmistakable. Vryn had been her mentor, the one who had shaped her into the warrior she had become. He had been her guide, her anchor, and in many ways, the embodiment of everything she had once believed in. Now, he was leading the charge against her. Xayah froze for a fraction of a second, her blaster lowering slightly as memories flooded her mind. She remembered the way he had pushed her beyond her limits during training, his booming voice a mix of encouragement and challenge. She remembered the battles they had fought side by side, the victories they had celebrated. He had been her mentor, her leader. And now, he was her enemy. Vryn's eyes locked onto hers, even across the chaos of the battlefield. Recognition flashed in his gaze, followed by a flicker of something she couldn't quite place, anger, betrayal, and perhaps even disbelief. He raised his weapon, and in that moment, Xayah knew hesitation would cost her everything. She rolled to the side as a plasma shot scorched the ground where she had stood. Heart pounding, she fired back, her blast striking dangerously close to Vryn. He deflected them with ease, his movements precise and calculated. "So it's true," Vryn's voice boomed over the chaos. "You've turned against us." Xayah clenched her jaw, standing her ground as he advanced toward her. "I haven't turned against anyone," she shot back. "I've chosen a different path." "A path of weakness," Vryn growled, his tone heavy with disdain. "You've betrayed your people, your blood. The Xayah I trained would never have fallen so far." His words stung, but Xayah didn't falter. "The Xayah you trained was blind," she retorted. "Blind to the destruction, the lies. You taught me to be strong, Vryn. Now I'm using that strength to protect, not to destroy. Vryn's expression darkened. You've been poisoned by these humans. They've made you soft. They've shown me a better way, Xayah said, her voice firm. A way you could never see. The battle raged around them, but in that moment, it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Vryn charged, his blade gleaming as he swung toward her. Xayah ducked, her reflexes honed by years of training. She countered with a swift strike, her weapon humming as it clashed against his. The fight was brutal, a dance of speed and precision that left no room for error. Vryn was as skilled as she remembered, his movements sharp and deliberate. But Xayah had changed. She wasn't the same warrior he had trained. She had learned to adapt, to think beyond the rigid doctrines of the Kereth. As their blades locked, Vryn leaned in, his voice a low growl. You've lost your way, Xayah. But it's not too late. Surrender, and I'll see to it that you're spared. Xayah's eyes burned with determination. Spared to what? Return to a life of blind obedience. No, Vryn. I've found something worth fighting for. With a burst of strength, she broke the lock, spinning away and delivering a strike that sent Vryn stumbling. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting an opponent, he was fighting the realization that the warrior he had molded was no longer his. The tide of the battle began to shift. Xayah's leadership and the humans' resolve proved stronger than the Kereth had anticipated. As the remaining elites began to fall back, Vryn stood his ground, his gaze locked on Xayah. This isn't over, he said, his voice cold. You've made your choice. When the time comes, you'll regret it. Xayah held her ground as he retreated, her heart heavy but her resolve unshaken. She had faced her past and stood firm. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she had truly taken a step forward. As the dust settled, Rhys's voice came over the comms. Xayah, report. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The Kereth are retreating. For now. Well done, Rhys said, his voice filled with relief. We'll regroup and prepare for the next wave. Xayah turned to her team, her gaze sweeping over their weary but determined faces. These humans, once her enemies, were now her allies. And she had chosen to stand with them, not because she had to, but because it was right. For the first time, Xayah felt like she truly belonged. The final stand. The air was thick with the smoke of burning wreckage, and the distant echoes of battle grew louder with every passing moment. Xayah stood on a ridge overlooking the colony of Juna 4, her violet eyes scanning the horizon. The Kereth fleet had regrouped, and their forces were closing in. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was the final push, the battle that would decide the fate of the colony, and perhaps her own. Around her, human soldiers fortified their defenses, their movements swift but deliberate. They were battered and bruised, their numbers stretched thin, but their resolve was unshaken. Xayah marveled at their determination. These were not warriors born and bred for combat like the Kereth. They were farmers, engineers, and scientists, fighting for the only home they had ever known. And now, she fought alongside them. Rhys approached, his face grim but calm. His green eyes, so steady even in the midst of chaos, met hers with a mixture of trust and urgency. They're bringing everything this time, he said. Their main assault force is en route, and the fleet will be in firing range within the hour. If we don't stop them here, the colony won't survive. Xayah nodded, her grip tightening on her weapon. What's the plan? Rhys pointed to a map displayed on his wrist-mounted holoprojector. Their ground forces are split into 3 columns. If we can disrupt their center column, it'll break their formation and give us a chance to push them back. But it's a long shot. Xayah studied the map, her sharp mind piecing together the strategy. The Kereth won't expect an attack on their center, she said. They'll think we'll focus on the flanks to avoid their heavy artillery. If we move fast and hit hard, we can catch them off guard. Rhys smiled faintly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. I'm putting you in charge of the strike team. Zaya's heart pounded. She had led countless missions before, but this was different. This wasn't about conquest or glory. This was about survival, about protecting something worth saving. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady. I know you won't, Rhys replied. Good luck, Zaya. As the strike team moved into position, Zaya's thoughts raced. She couldn't shake the memory of Commander Vryn's words during their last encounter. You've made your choice. When the time comes, you'll regret it. Was this the time he had spoken of? Would she regret turning her back on her people? The weight of those questions threatened to crush her, but she pushed them aside. There was no room for doubt. Not now. The Kereth column came into view, their formation as precise and disciplined as ever. Zaya's heart clenched as she recognized the banners of her former unit. These were her comrades, warriors she had trained and fought alongside for years. But now, they were the enemy. She took a deep breath and raised her calm, team, stay low and wait for my signal. We strike fast and don't stop until their line is broken. Acknowledgements crackled through the comm, and Zaya felt a flicker of pride in the humans who had trusted her enough to follow her lead. They were brave, perhaps even braver than the Kereth, because they fought not out of obligation but out of choice. The first blast was hers. Zaya fired a precise shot at the Kereth's communications hub, the explosion sending shockwaves through their ranks. Chaos erupted as her team surged forward, their movements swift and coordinated. The Kereth warriors scrambled to regroup, but Zaya was relentless, her strikes swift and decisive. She moved like a shadow through the battlefield, her blade and blaster a blur of motion. Her team followed her lead, their trust in her unshakable. Together, they pushed deeper into the Kereth formation, their bold attack sowing confusion and disarray. But then, amidst the chaos, Zaya saw him. Commander Vryn stood at the heart of the column, his silver-trimmed armor gleaming despite the smoke and fire around him. His presence was commanding, his voice cutting through the noise as he rallied his warriors. Zaya, he bellowed, his tone both furious and commanding. Face me, if you have any honor left. The battlefield seemed to freeze as their gazes met. Zaya's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was it, the confrontation she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She stepped forward, her blade humming to life. I'm not the same warrior you trained, Vryn, she said, her voice steady. And I don't answer to you anymore. Vryn's expression darkened, and he raised his weapon. Then prove it. Their clash was brutal and unrelenting. Vryn fought with the precision and ferocity of a seasoned commander, but Zaya matched him blow for blow. She was faster, more agile, her movements fueled by the knowledge that this fight wasn't just for her, it was for the lives of everyone depending on her. You've betrayed everything we stood for. Vryn roared as their blades locked. I've betrayed nothing, Zaya shot back, her voice fierce. I've chosen to fight for something greater than conquest. Can you say the same? Vryn hesitated for the briefest moment, and Zaya seized the opportunity. With a swift strike, she disarmed him, her blade stopping just short of his neck. Yield, she commanded, her voice unwavering. Vryn glared at her, his pride and anger warring with the reality of his defeat. Finally, he lowered his head. You've become stronger than I ever imagined. Zaya stepped back, her blade retracting. Strength isn't just about winning battles, Vryn. It's about knowing what's worth fighting for. The Kereth forces, seeing their commander defeated, began to falter. The humans pushed forward, their combined efforts overwhelming the remaining enemy troops. The tide of the battle had turned. When the dust settled, Zaya stood amidst the wreckage, her body weary but her spirit unbroken. The colony was safe, the Kereth retreating into the void of space. Around her, humans embraced one another, their relief palpable. Rhys approached, his green eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Xayah corrected, a faint smile tugging at her lips. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, of purpose. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was something more, a protector, a leader, and perhaps even a symbol of hope. As she looked out at the horizon, the sun breaking through the clouds, Xayah knew her journey wasn't over. But for the first time in her life, she was ready to face whatever came next.